Why stick with Ezio? What does this game need to do to warrant its spot in the AC franchise? That is where we're at right now. The first game was a sort of proof of concept of the idea of Assassin's Creed, smaller but showed it could work. The second game showed how well this can be done and expanded the world. This game needs to do something special to warrant its own existence other than to just be another game in the series. So what does this game actually do? If you ignore the assault on Monteriggioni and the final kill, oh, and the modern day story of course, the game takes place almost entirely within Rome. This allows for a more complex power structure and struggle than the previous game. Not only due to the reduced locations, but also because of Ezio's position within the Order. He's now the mentor of the Assassin Brotherhood. He's the leader and needs to make bigger decisions after his uncle bit the big one. This leads nicely into that bigger and more complicated power structure as an evolution to the previous game. The map for Rome has some interesting additions. It didn't appear in the previous game, but there are locations I wouldn't have expected. The main one being the tunnels running underneath the city that are used by the cult of Romulus. These allow for some more freedom in puzzle design for the creators. They don't have to stick as rigidly to the aesthetic and design logic of Rome when underground, and they take advantage of this. We see big tunnels and extravagant puzzles in this place. The sense of scale is only rivaled by some of the biggest buildings in the game. Even if the look for this is more dingy than awe-inspiring, I get the feeling the designers wanted a bigger space to play around with, and thus they invented the layers of Romulus. That is quite the elegant solution. Over the course of the game, mistrust is sown within the Brotherhood, initially by La Volpe, Master of Thieves, throwing suspicions on none other than Machiavelli. It shouldn't be surprising that Machiavelli is a traitor considering how he is historically known. However, I did praise the previous game for not doing that, so I'd have to take that back if it was truly him that was the traitor. So instead of this guy, everyone expected to be the traitor, actually being the traitor, the devs added a little twist. It wasn't a super obvious choice. Instead, it was this random bald dude. Yeah, not really their best work. There's a good rule of thumb for twists. The twist needs to be more interesting than just playing it straight. In this instance, it is absolutely not. Whilst Machiavelli would have been the most predictable twist villain since Makima, it would have still added a good bit of drama because in the last game he was on our side the whole time. So it would have been a proper betrayal which could have led into a very interesting duel and revenge scale. In reality, however, we get this random no-name goon betraying the Brotherhood. Seriously, even Ezio didn't even know his name. He just yells, "You!" This guy has a collective screen time of like 5 minutes if we include the chase down of him, and even that's generous. This guy almost did major damage to the Brotherhood without being deemed worthy of a name. A major theme in this game is trust. Ezio doesn't trust his sister at the start, but eventually learns to trust her through her good work and inducts her into the Brotherhood. As mentioned before, there is distrust around Machiavelli, and this leads to a major loss for the Brotherhood that is only evaded through trust. The Borgia, being the villains, have the opposite going. They don't trust each other, or at least shouldn't. Cesare is actively trying to seize power from his father and eventually kills him. He's also in a romantic relationship with his sister, which is disgusting, but she cheats on him, and I thought they were keeping it in the family. Trust being this big a part of the game, a twist villain doesn't make sense as it would reinforce the idea that you shouldn't trust your allies because they might betray you. So in that vein, it makes sense to not be Machiavelli. However, there is still a twist villain. It's just not someone interesting, or named for that matter. And it could be interesting seeing the Brotherhood recover after one of their biggest allies betrays them and they still choose to trust each other rather than turn on themselves after a big betrayal. The theme could be further reinforced, so that is a big missed opportunity. I want to take a moment to talk about Ezio's growth, which might sound a bit weird considering he probably has more character development in the previous game. I mean, he goes from a scrub to a full-fledged assassin in the last game. He learned how to control his anger and fight for the greater good, not just his own vengeance. How could this game ever top that? The answer is that it can't. However, Brotherhood has a different approach. Ezio has gotten a lot of work done internally. So now, this time around, Ezio has to reconcile external factors, his own perceptions around his sister's capabilities, the internal strife within the Brotherhood, and filling the void left by his uncle. This development is fitting with the period in his life we find him in. He is now an adult who has resolved his internal personal conflict, grown up, and is shouldering a bigger burden, leading people. So we see him manage this throughout the game. While this isn't the biggest development compared to the previous game, it does take Ezio's character in an interesting direction. It would have been easy to allow him to stagnate and fulfill a more stoic leader role, a calm center that other characters orbit around. But choosing to have him still have flaws that form naturally from his previous characterization, is really good. Especially because this is the only main character we spent several games with. Kinda. It is important that he does not stagnate. Similar to how we discussed the balance of new ideas in sequels in the last video, link in the description, there's a balance to characterization. In this sequel, you don't want to retread the same ground you did in the last game, but at the same time, you don't want to add a random character trait to a previously established character, especially if it's a beloved character. You want character flaws to spawn naturally from previous characterization and then evolve. Just because a person has realized how to deal with one situation related to their flaw does not mean they have solved this flaw. It will continue to appear in different situations. This is how progress works in real life, and it is always good when writing a character to remember that. This is not a necessary part of characterization. There are good characters that do solve their flaws, but this is generally in shorter stories. When a character is under a microscope for a prolonged period of time, it becomes one of the most important parts of their characterization of how to deal with these core flaws and problems. All this is to highlight the writing decision made with Ezio's arc in this game. It feels like a small part of the game, especially when you can already see the problem with his initial approach from the start of the game. Then it can feel like Ezio's playing catch up. However, it is still an important addition. There is major progress in this game in the way of our understanding of the world of Assassin's Creed. If you look at it that way, that seems to be the main reason for this game's existence. This is only unlocked through finding all the glyphs that are scattered around the map, which is a cool way to unlock extra lore. Emphasis on extra lore. Main story progression shouldn't be locked behind anything but the main quest. Putting extra lore behind the side quest wall is fine. I digress. The extra lore we unlock is that of Adam and Eve. We find out they escaped their fates as slaves at the hands of the ones who came before, escaping the garden, and starting humanity as we know it. And this blending of real-life religion and mythology with this world's fantastical elements is when the story is at its most interesting, right alongside name-dropping important historical figures. In the lore aspect, this game delivers. This escape to found humanity might have been designed by the ones who came before. This is left kind of ambiguous. Could very well be that they let this happen because they could not see a way to save themselves, but a way to save humanity. Or it could be that humanity's escape from under their thumbs was predestined. Either way, we meet another one of the ones who came before. This one is named Juno. She reveals that after the Great Cataclysm, the Forerunners tried to save themselves and humanity. However, they failed to stay alive and had to entrust the future of the planet to humanity. Humans had the capacity for wisdom even though they did not make them that way, which I think is very cool. Throughout history, we see humanity's curiosity and thirst for knowledge come through in the major discoveries throughout the ages. Once again, this game blends what is historical with what makes sense in their unique setting to elevate certain parts. In this case, it reinforces the idea that there are things that are just human nature, that even our creators couldn't control for. Curiosity being on top of that list is a surprisingly beautiful message in a story that tends to talk about control versus freedom. But right on cue, we're back to that message, because Juno's speech also tells us that the artifacts were supposed to be used for that surprising understanding and curiosity that humanity is capable of. However, instead, as we have seen over these 3 games, it tends to be used for control by the Templars, which is very ironic when you think about it. The Templars' creed is, "May the Father of Understanding guide you," which would at first glance indicate that they are indeed following in the footsteps of Juno's people. However, they don't use the artifacts for anything but gaining more power and control over people. This shows us that the Templars really suck at their jobs. They have gone way too far in the idea and have fully drunk the Kool-Aid. Now their goal of understanding has been perverted into one of control, which is an effective way to show that the villains are up to no good and are going too far even within their own space of beliefs. This is something that I didn't put together until a good while after I played this game, and you could argue this means there should have been more instances of this, or more clues towards this parallel. You could do that, but I won't. I like this feeling of discovering this major parallel, and it fits right into the vibe of the game. I know that's very floaty commentary and might be hard to understand, but some things are good just because they fit in the vibe. This parallel fits right in there. Whilst playing these games and having the story wash over me, sometimes it can feel overwhelming and like a lot's going on. This is a good thing. When we were talking about what is a desperate struggle between 2 factions, one which has the established power and the other who has to take it from them. A side effect of this is that some things might not make sense at the time due to the pace and feeling, but when you sit and think about it, it will make sense. And that is something I think is good. Not all media is easily consumed, and even media that is easily consumed can have more under the surface than you initially think. Look at any kids TV show that holds up surprisingly well when you're an adult. Initially easy consumption and entertainment as a kid, later you see more themes that work well and your taste is vindicated. All this is building up to the modern day gang finding the apple in the temple of Juno in Rome. guided by Ezio's memories from the Animus. This justification for going through the Animus portion of the game is good because it gives us a goal to search for other than just kill evil people. I'm a firm believer that in a series, especially one as long as this, an overarching goal is necessary, but intermediate goals stop that from feeling laborious. It can sometimes be hard to keep track of those goals, especially between games, but it is still important to have them. The story should have an impact. Then we move on to the finale of this game. The group finds the apple and Desmond grabs it, only to have time freeze as the apple forces him to kill Lucy. To kill his most trusted friend, the one who recruited him, saved him from Hystergo's clutches, the one who gave him his freedom. This left my mouth agape. Once again, the ending of the game is insane and gets you hyped for the next one, because not only does Lucy, one of the oldest known characters, die, Desmond goes into shock. Juno tells him to find the sixth, presumably another Forerunner, and there is a familiar voice that Desmond hears right before he goes comatose and is put into the Animus again to hopefully fix what's going on. So that ending was a lot to take in. It raises a bunch of questions and leaves us wondering how the next game is going to continue from this. Because not only do we have the questions of who was the voice, who or what is the sixth, but also we want to know how the Animus is possibly going to fix this. Once again, a lot of setup for the next game, and it is great. I don't really have notes on these endings, as you might have noticed. This is because I just want to illustrate how crazy they are, and as they're mostly set up for the next game, I judge them on the basis of how well they set up the next game, just as much as how well they round out this game. And on both fronts, this game does a good job. We have answered our questions and goals from the start of the game, the overarching goal still remains, but new questions have been raised. This ending is functional. Then, let's head to our rankings. And whilst this game is still really good and built on what worked from the last game, I think its story is where I find it lacking a bit. Even with all the good things I just said about the ending, it is this theme of trust that irks me. Especially with how the resolution to the Brotherhood betrayal is an unnamed NPC we see one time before that. It is a major weakness in the story which AC2 just doesn't have. So for that reason, I will put it behind its predecessor, but the improvements in gameplay and its small additions where they are present are in my opinion enough to still say it is better than the original. And going forward, I project that the original game is going to be the baseline from which we are going to judge whether or not a game is good. But that's just some predicting on my end. So for now, remember that the difference between mythology and religion is active belief.